Hey guys, this is going to be my first legendary weapon comparison video. I'm going to start making more of these as I unlock more of these weapons. But for now, the first one we have is the Kira submachine gun versus the Niko stopper auto rifle. These are the two that drop from the Blade Dancer dungeon, and they're two of the most sought after legendary weapons in the game right now. So this is the Niko stopper, and here are its stats and perks. If you were to compare this with another epic auto rifle, you'll see that it has better stats than normal. And as you can see from its perks, it's stacked with every single damage perk, as well as a rate of fire perk. So overall, it's rolled pretty well. Its design has this sort of rugged, makeshift look to it, mostly because of the bandages, and it also has a unique firing sound. But I think the best part about it is its iron sights, which are very clean and easy to use. So up next is the Kira, and on the screen you can see its stats and perks. Again, it has better stats than usual for an SMG, but it's not rolled quite as well as the Niko stopper. On top of not having every single damage perk, some of its values are also lower, like having 10% crit damage instead of the 14 that you get on Niko stopper. As for the actual design, it looks much more mechanical than the Niko stopper, and honestly, it looks like it would fit more as a drop from Voltaic Fist rather than Blade. It has a very distinctive firing sound. It almost sounds like a nail gun. But the one problem with its design is definitely its iron sights. I mean, look at that. You might as well just have a black block there. You can't see shit through them. Now let's talk about PvE performance. Overall, it's not bad for killing ads, but its magazine size is definitely a problem. Even when you max it out, it only has 35 in the mag. And for a 600 rate of fire, low damage submachine gun, that means you're going to be reloading a ton, even if you're just killing ads. Another issue with it is its range. You won't feel it as much in dungeons because all those fights are very close quarters, but in arena you might find yourself just out of reach of that void caller. Against Volt, it crits for 207 and hits regularly for 101. Keep in mind that these numbers are going to be different for you depending on your gear and the buffs you have, but for these videos I will be wearing the same gear throughout and I will be using no buffs. Taking into account the 8% rate of fire perk that this weapon has, this means that it will be doing 2236 DPS to Volt, which is still less than a single shot of Essence Killer, but not bad for a primary. Now on to Blade Dancer. This one's a little bit trickier because due to the passives I have in my skill tree, I'm actually dealing more damage to his back than I am to his head. But for the purposes of these videos, I'm always going to calculate maximum possible DPS, which in this case is 224 to Blade's back. That's going to translate to 2419 DPS, which, again, not bad for a primary. Now onto the Niko stopper. I have to say, this one performs much better in PvE than the Kira. First of all, the iron sights. They may not seem like that big of a deal, but depending on your skill passives and perks, you may have up to 15% extra damage just from aiming down sights. And it definitely helps if, when you aim down sight, you can actually see what you're shooting at instead of having to guess where the enemy's head is. Another thing is the mag size and the fact that it's a higher damage archetype. It means that you'll be reloading a lot less and that you'll be able to kill more enemies in one mag, and it definitely helps. Lastly, the range. Again, it doesn't make that big of a difference and you'll only really ever notice it in arenas, but it's a nice touch. It crits for 283 on Volt, which translates to 2179 DPS, which is actually lower than Kira's. Now this surprised me at first, but it does make sense. The reason that Niko stopper may feel better to use against Volt is the fact that you can end the damage phase in a single mag, provided that he has his back turned to you for long enough. You just can't do that with Kira. Now, I didn't get those DPS numbers taking reloads into consideration, although I should have, but I couldn't be bothered. Maybe Pyro can do it later. But they do matter because time you spent reloading is time you're not spending doing damage. In Blade it's a similar story. 298 damage to his back, which translates to an optimal DPS of 2295, which again is lower than Kira's. And in this dungeon, the thing I said about reloads doesn't matter quite as much because this boss doesn't have phases the way that Volt does, and unless you're really coordinated with your stuns or you're using the glitch, you're really not going to have enough time to dump an entire mag into him. Still though, everything else I mentioned means that 9 times out of 10, I'm going to take the Niko stopper over the Kira in PvE. PvP is a completely different story. A lot of the problems with the Kira start to disappear when you take PvP into consideration. For starters, the low range doesn't really matter, because long range encounters are pretty much non-existent in PvP, so it becomes a non-factor. Same thing with the iron sights. Yes, the irons are still awful, but really you shouldn't be aiming down sight at all in PvP. It hinders your mobility too much, and the damage bonus provided is not quite 15%. In fact, at best it's 1 extra damage. It's just not worth it. All this leaves is a low mag size, which is still a problem. So you have to get used to pulling out your pistol very quickly in the middle of a duel if you run out of bullets. But really, it's not too much to get used to as long as you have a pistol you're comfortable with. Besides that, all you're left with is the Kira's higher time to kill, which of course means it'll be performing better in PvP. It does 8 damage to the body, 18 to the head, and 21 to the back. Assuming the person you're fighting has 124 health, which is the max you can get through armor perks, that means you'll be killing them in 1.48, 0.65, and 0.55 seconds respectively. That's really fast. So yeah, once you get the hang of this thing, you should be getting killing sprees pretty easily with it. That leaves the Niko stopper with a lot to live up to, and unfortunately, it doesn't quite do it. It's not a bad PvP weapon at all, but it's not as good as the Kira. For starters, it just doesn't kill as fast. Under normal circumstances, it will do 10 damage to the body, 21 to the head, and 24 to the back. Again, using a 124 health player for this hypothetical, that leaves us with a 1.69 body shot time to kill, and a 0.78 optimal time to kill. In this case, there is no difference between back shots and headshots for time to kill. Again, this will vary depending on your perks and your crit multipliers, but for me, back shots are no better than headshots. Now, these times to kill aren't that much slower than the Kira's, but the main difference comes in the fact that the Kira is a higher rate of fire, close quarters weapon. It just does better in the small maps like these. If we had more mid-range and long-range maps, maybe the Nikos could stand out in those and outperform the Kira, because it would definitely outperform it at range. But there just aren't as many situations for that in the current PvP. Maybe in the future, if we get larger maps, you might want to try it out and it could be better. But for now, I'd say stick to the Kira for PvP. Otherwise, if you are using the Niko stopper, I'd say to play it more safely. If you've been paying attention to the gameplay, I've been doing a lot of flanking and getting back shots, not as many head-on, one-on-one encounters, because I tend to lose those, as opposed to with the Kira, where I feel more confident that I can kill the other player before he kills me. Overall, this is about what I expected from just playing around with both weapons. It's fitting that the weapon that you can get from PvP is more suited to PvP, and the one that only goes from PvE is more suited for that. Okay, well that's it for this comparison. For the next one, I'm going to compare what I consider to be the two most disappointing legendaries in the game. I'll give you a hint, they're both on the screen.